It was just another ordinary afternoon. You walked into a familiar cafe, not expecting anything different. She was already there, sitting by the window, gently spinning her wedding ring, not anxiously, but as if measuring something quietly inside herself. You've seen that look before, the gaze of a woman who knows exactly where she stands. But today, when she looked at you, it wasn't the same. It lingered, it softened, and you could feel it. Something between the two of you had shifted, subtle, wordless, but enough to make you pause longer than usual. And the moment that makes you pause isn't when she steps closer. It's when you realize you might have taken a half step forward first. You, the one who thought you were above all this. You didn't mean to lean in, but now even her silence feels like an invitation. Or maybe the absence of a warning. Maybe you told yourself she was just lonely. Maybe you believed you were strong enough to stay detached. But maybe, just maybe, it was the way she held your gaze a few seconds longer that made every unspoken boundary feel suddenly negotiable. And when that happens, what do? Do you lean in, give your feelings a name, or do you hold on to the only thing that lets you walk away without apologizing to yourself? Your self-respect. And sometimes things don't begin with clear words, but with the smallest changes in the way she looks at you, the way she mentions you, and slowly stops, mentioning the one who's walked through the years beside her. 1. She no longer talks about her husband and starts talking about you. At first, you thought she just needed someone to listen. A woman with a husband, a child, responsibilities. Sometimes, having someone simply sit beside you in silence is enough to feel lighter. But over time, you begin to realize the one stepping deeper into that silence is you. In the beginning, she talked about her husband, the fatigue, the long silences between them, the occasional complaints laced with quiet resignation. You didn't interrupt. You didn't try to fix anything. You just listened, because you believed that sometimes understanding doesn't mean solving. It means showing up. But then the stories began to change. No more mentions of him. No more talk about family or children. Instead, she started weaving you into her sentences, gently, unexpectedly. She remembered small things you said, little things you did, even the way you sat quietly at the end of a long day. She noticed that too. And then one evening, she looked at you and said softly, "If you were my husband, I don't think I'd have to live with so much endurance." It was a passing comment, like something said without intent, but something in you shifted, not loudly, not clearly, just in the way she looked at you, as if she had begun placing you somewhere else, even if no one had said it out loud. Maybe you didn't mean to step in, but you stayed. You didn't move forward. You didn't step back. You just stood still inside a connection whose lines were fading. And the most unsettling part wasn't that she was changing. It was your silence. The quiet way you began accepting a role you knew you were never meant to play. And in that moment, the question isn't whether she likes you. It's this: are you still honoring your own boundaries? A rational man doesn't step away because he's afraid. He steps away because he understands that not every feeling, no matter how real, belongs in the wrong place. 2. She creates private spaces for you and no one else. Not all connections begin with long stares or words laced with hidden meaning. Sometimes it's just a small ritual, something that happens again and again, only with you. Like the way Emma asks you to lunch on an ordinary weekday. "Are you free at noon? I just want to talk, just the two of us, no explanation, no one else invited." At first, you think it's just lunch between colleagues, but then it happens again and again. Emma always picks moments when the office is busy. She avoids crowded places. She keeps the meetings private, almost quietly sacred, and each time there's a softness in her presence, a calm, detached air, as if she's stepping out of her life, just for a while. One time, you suggest inviting Rachel or Ben along. Emma smiles and gently shakes her head. No, I just want to see you. Talking to you clears my mind. The words sound casual, but they stay with you longer than they should. Because at some point, those conversations stopped being about work. They became about things she didn't share with anyone else. Regrets, long silences, the spaces she didn't know how to name. You realize you've started showing up not in a crowd, but inside a world she's quietly built. One where you feel like someone who matters. She hasn't crossed any line with her words, but the silence between you two is beginning to speak louder than anything else. Maybe you've become her place of retreat. But if so, what you need isn't the thrill of being chosen. It's this question: are you helping her become stronger, or are you both walking towards something that shouldn't happen? A man who's grown doesn't just know how to listen. He knows when to stop, to protect himself and the person across from him from crossing a line that should never blur. 3. When you talk about another woman, she falls unusually silent. She used to laugh, to tease you every time you mentioned some girl in a story. Once, you told her you'd just met someone during a workshop. She widened her eyes and playfully said, "So, someone's replacing me already?" Those words used to feel light, effortless, like you'd always be in her safe zone. But this time, it wasn't the same. You mentioned a new teammate, not boastfully, just in passing. She's in the new team, super upbeat, really sweet energy. And suddenly, the mood dropped. She went quiet. Her hand tightened slightly around her glass. That usual spark in her eyes dimmed, as if you'd just stepped outside a line she'd quietly drawn, but never named. I've done that before. I once said the name of another woman, not to provoke, not to flirt, just to see where my own boundaries were. She didn't get jealous. She didn't react. She just pulled out her phone and scrolled aimlessly. But I knew, in that moment, she'd lost the ability to pretend. Silence is denial, but silence is also an answer. And for a brief moment, you sense something neither of you has dared to say out loud, that something between you has already crossed into more than friendship. It doesn't need to be confirmed or denied. It just shows in the way she no longer has the calm to act like nothing matters when you turn your eyes towards someone else. But that very moment is when you need to look at yourself. Because if you sense something's gone too far, then responsibility doesn't belong to her alone. A Stoic doesn't run from emotion. He simply doesn't let emotion lead him where he knows he shouldn't go. And if that silence made you go still, the question isn't, does she like me? It's, am I still guarding my own boundaries? 4. She says, "You're not like other men I've known." You still remember that night? You were sitting together on the steps outside a colleague's birthday party. She rested her head gently on her hand, staring out at the empty courtyard. Then she turned to you, her voice quiet, her eyes a little dimmer, and said, "You're not like the other men I've known." There was no obvious suggestion in her words, no long look to follow, but the air between you two changed, quietly, strangely, as if some invisible film had just been lightly torn. Nothing clear, but enough to make you feel you were no longer standing in the same place. You didn't answer, didn't react, but you knew something inside her had started to shift. That word, different, wasn't just a compliment. It was a fragile space, a comparison between what is and what someone deep down believes should have been. From that night on, Her eyes lingered longer, her messages got more personal, and the silence between you began to carry things you couldn't name. She didn't cross a line, but the quiet started pressing against something unspoken, and you, even if you didn't lean in, didn't fully step back either. Maybe you didn't intend anything, but you could feel it. She was starting to see in you what she no longer saw in her own life. And then you began to wonder, if you really are different, will you protect that difference by stepping away? Or will you blur it by staying in a space that never asked you to? Some people don't need you to say anything. Your silence is already a commitment. And sometimes the biggest difference you can offer is knowing when to walk away. Because sometimes kindness isn't answering someone's feelings, it's having the strength not to become the reason they forget what they were meant to hold on to. 5. The messages no longer stop before 10 p.m. After a long gaze, after a line that stepped beyond friendship, things could have stayed quiet, if not for the messages that started arriving after the city had gone to sleep. She didn't say anything obvious, but she began texting you at the hour when your guard is low. Not midday, not about work, just later, softer, and no one else knows. You used to be the one who messaged first, a check-in when she looked tired, a half-joking emoji that meant you cared. But lately, it's been her. The texts come in after 10, sometimes a sigh in words. All day, I've just wanted to shut everything off. Other times, it's a photo of her teacup with the caption, "Wish someone was sitting next to me." What's striking is that her messages don't demand an answer. They appear quietly, like a habit, a gentle reminder that you now live in her inner world, not as an old friend, but as someone who's slowly taken on a new role. It's the consistency that starts to trouble you. If every message is harmless, why do you feel uneasy when you don't reply? And if truly nothing's going on, why do you find yourself thinking about her more with each night? No words cross the line, but they press so close that you have to breathe slower when you read them. Under the warm light of your quiet room, you hold your phone, and somewhere inside, you know this shouldn't continue. She doesn't say she loves you, doesn't invite anything, but she's letting you into her private space, exactly when she feels weakest. And that lack of definition is what unsettles you more than any confession could. You tell yourself you're keeping your distance, but maybe the only thing you're keeping is the silence that lets you keep drifting from what's right. Some messages don't say the wrong thing, but feel wrong because you're still replying, even when deep down you already know what's approaching. 6. She says, "If I had met you earlier." Not every sentence that stirs the heart is a confession of love. Some words are light, ordinary, yet they make something in you slip before you even know you were holding it steady. One day, while the two of you were talking about work, about the kind of daily pressure that never really goes away, she paused. Her tone softened. Her eyes didn't meet yours. They looked instead toward the dim space outside the cafe as the last customers drifted out. Then she said, "If I had met you earlier, maybe things would have been different." It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a hint. Just a quiet fracture in the moment, one you weren't ready for. A line that sounded like she was regretting something in her own life, yet somehow left you carrying the weight of it. And so, for a brief second, you felt like someone set apart, not because she loved you, but because, to her, you seemed like the right person, who simply arrived too late. She didn't need to reach for your hand. That sentence alone was enough to bring you closer to something unspoken. You didn't know what to do. Smile, too little. Nod, too much. Say something. Nothing would have sounded right, so you said nothing. But inside, something had already shifted. That moment gave you the feeling of an alternate path, one that never truly existed, but still managed to leave a footprint. It left you with a quiet, persistent thought. Maybe she gave you something she'd never given anyone else. A regret that was sincere. She might never say those words again, but you keep them like a small itch beneath the skin. Now and then you touch it. You wonder, what if I really had come sooner? But the truth is, what ifs don't change the present, and the right person, met at the wrong time, is still the wrong time. A man guided by reason doesn't deny his feelings, but neither does he let those feelings redraw the boundaries reality has already drawn. If one simple regret makes you feel like you deserve something more than what is yours, then maybe that's the moment you have to ask yourself, how much are you willing to give up just to feel worthy of something that was never meant to be yours in the first place? 7. You start to feel guilty, even though you've done nothing wrong. You don't quite remember when it began. It was just one of those ordinary days when you realized, somewhere between routine and quiet, that you were starting to feel guilty, even though you hadn't done anything wrong. You didn't flirt. You didn't suggest anything. Not a single word crossed the line. Every conversation had its reason. Every meeting seemed accidental. And if someone happened to glance at your messages, they could all be explained by one label: friends. But then there are nights when the screen of your phone dims and lights up again, when the only light in the room comes from your desk lamp, and you begin to ask yourself, where exactly am I in this connection? Not from the outside, but deep within. Because even though nothing has technically happened, you feel yourself taking half a step closer each time. You haven't expressed anything, but you haven't pulled back. You haven't said it aloud, but you haven't stopped it either. And it's the vagueness of it all that's starting to exhaust you. She hasn't said anything wrong. You haven't done anything wrong. But between the two of you, there are too many things left unsaid. And it's those very silences that keep you from sleeping well. One night you wonder, if her husband knew, what would I say? Not because you're afraid, but because you know you wouldn't have a single answer that even you could fully believe in. You begin justifying that you had no intention, that she initiated it, that you were only being kind. But when you have to start building fences of logic around something, it means your conscience already sees the cracks. Guilt doesn't always come from action. Sometimes it's born from not stopping, even when you know you're standing too close. And sometimes the reason you leave isn't because the other person pushed you out, but because you no longer want to lie to yourself, not even once more. 8. She doesn't stop you when you get a little closer. After all the silences, the late-night messages, the glances that linger longer than they should, there will be a moment when you move a little closer. Not much, just a little. Maybe the two of you are sitting in a small cafe, and your shoulder leans slightly in, your hand brushes gently against her elbow. There's no script, no clear intention, just something rising inside, and a quiet wish to hold on to it with the softest touch. She doesn't pull away, doesn't shift in her seat, doesn't change the subject, but she doesn't say anything either. And that silence leaves you unsure. Did she just invite you in, or did she simply not push you out? Between permission and rejection, sometimes there's just a quiet gap, but it's filled with questions neither of you wants to ask aloud. After that moment, nothing is mentioned again. Life goes on as if nothing happened. But something has changed, at least for you. You begin to think more, feel more, and you start negotiating with yourself, convincing yourself that it's still okay, as long as no one gets hurt. But you know, intimacy doesn't always grow from love. It can come from emptiness, from a soft, vulnerable moment, from someone who doesn't want something but also doesn't have the strength to stop it. And if you continue, you're not just testing feelings, you're testing the boundaries between you, the ones no one ever agreed to cross. Her silence wasn't an invitation. It may have been her way of coping in a situation she herself doesn't understand. And if you take that silence as permission to step forward, then maybe the person who needs to reflect is you. Because if a relationship needs silence to survive, should you really still be in it? You don't have to fight your emotions, because emotions aren't the enemy. They come and go, like everything else in life. But what you do need to choose is how not to let them make you lose yourself in the process. She might truly be sad, genuinely lonely, in real need of someone who understands, and you might be the only one who makes it easier for her to breathe after days that have felt suffocating. But remember this, feeling important doesn't mean you should stay. Some roles are only meant to exist in one scene. Stretch them beyond that, and you begin playing the wrong part. And playing the wrong part in a relationship that never had a name only leads to confusion. You don't need to judge her, but you should be clear on this. Someone who is still unclear with the person from their past is rarely clear with the person in front of them. If she hasn't stepped fully out of her last story, then you're not walking into something solid. You're walking into quiet compromise and slow, unseen damage. Also, undefined emotions often feel the most intense. Precisely because they have no label, we start giving them too much meaning, more than they ever actually carry. But when you're calm enough to look again, you may realize what's holding you isn't love. It's the feeling of being needed in someone else's fragile moment. So, self-respect doesn't come from dramatic words or coldness. It comes from stepping back, quietly. The moment you feel the lines beginning to blur, you don't need to win. You don't need a perfect reason. You just need to walk away, not out of pain, but because you understand when enough is enough. A conscious man doesn't fear emotions. He just doesn't let them become the reason to stay in something his clarity already knows should end. Not every look should be returned. Not every connection should be pursued. And not everyone who wants you should get to have you. Attraction sometimes doesn't come from the other person. It comes from how they make you feel about yourself, the version of you reflected back in their eyes. But that feeling, if not placed in the right context, can become the very thing that throws you off balance. Some people arrive at the right moment, not to stay, but to teach you how to stay with yourself. They stir something in you, but they also teach you how to walk away, gently, without bitterness. Because when you're clear enough to step away from something that was never fully defined, you are choosing self-respect over self-pity. A strong man is not someone who never gets caught in complications. He is someone who, even while emotions rise, knows how to stop before his kindness is used in the wrong way. Some boundaries, once crossed, can't be stepped back over without leaving a crack behind. Have you ever been in that situation where nothing seemed wrong, but it still didn't feel right to continue? Did you stay hoping she'd gain clarity, or did you walk away without blame, without drama, just quietly and with dignity? If you've lived through that moment, share your story in the comments. Maybe your experience will help someone standing on that same edge choose the right direction for themselves.